It's been a rocky few months for the Disney company. Personally, I like many of the recent changes that CEO Bob Iger has initiated at the company. He's returned more authority to people who make movies and TV shows and has limited the power of those who plan distribution schedules. At the parks, he's drawn down on reservations and other restrictions. He's refocused the streaming service more on core properties such as Star Wars and Marvel, and less on food shows. But the stock price simply hasn't recovered since he took over the reins. 2 years ago, Disney stock was flying high at $197 per share. Presently, it's down to $87, which is nearly what it was when the stock crashed on March 20th, 2020, at the start of the pandemic, when all Disney parks around the world closed. Some elements placing downward pressure on the stock are out of his control. Inflation and a possible recession are causing families to be more cautious with disposable income. Specifically, many families are traveling less. Disneyland is still fairly full, but the California resort draws an audience primarily from Southern California, people who come for a day or two at most. Disney World, however, has been unusually empty. On a Saturday evening in May, despite the posted 35-minute wait time, I was nearly able to walk onto Rise of the Resistance with no line at all, an attraction that can easily have between a 90-minute and 2-hour wait. I was able to walk right up to the equipment room and was 5 minutes away from being in the briefing room with Ray. From a few sources, I can tell you that in terms of traditional tourism, the summer attendance at Disney World should be down somewhere about 20% off of a usual summer. Beyond the general economic fears, the Disney company is aware that it's priced some of its core audience, specifically middle-class families with younger kids, out of the Disney World market. That is, the narrative of the expensive Disney World vacation is starting to make a noticeable impact at the tap styles, particularly with those younger families. This creates a long-term problem for the company. When families go to Disney World when their kids are young and when they have a good experience, they tend to return a few years later for a second trip and then a third trip. If families don't make that initial trip when their kids are young, they may be less likely to jump in later when their kids, slightly older, might be more interested in other parks with more thrill attractions. To combat this, Disney World just unveiled a 4-day, $99 per day ticket, which almost surely is an attempt to draw back some of those middle-class families. Beyond the ticket deals, Disney has discounted hotel rooms in Florida at least through the summer. And pricing and market issues aren't the only stories that we have this month. There are a deep line of other changes, repositioning the company and at least one of its studios in the months ahead. And today on the podcast, we're going to walk you through all of them and look at what they mean for the future of the Disney company overall. So today, we're going to walk out 3 stories. First, we'll take a look at the Disney dining plan for the Florida resort, exploring when it might be a good value now that pricing for 2024 has finally been released. Second, we'll discuss some fairly serious problems that are now unfolding for Pixar. And last, we'll take a look at what is and what is not working as Disney rolls out its plans for Tiana's Bayou adventure now that Splash Mountain has closed on both coasts. And as you might notice, beyond this, there's some other stories, including some key issues for the Disney company, that I'm saving for next week. Looking at the word count for this week's script, I'm pretty sure that this show is going to total out at somewhere near 50 minutes. And beyond this, there's still another set of fairly chunky stories for us to tackle next week. For the past couple of months, we've simply been in a very news-rich period for the Disney company, which I suspect will taper off once we officially roll into summer. So, if you're ready to explore all that's happening, here we go. We're going to lead off with a story that updates a popular feature that we explored in last month's episode. As we talked about last time, 2 versions of the Disney dining plan are coming back next January to the Florida resort. For many Florida tourists, this has been the most important element missing from the Disney World experience since the pandemic. We now have more details about the dining plan, including price increases and also decreases. The one significant jump in terms of pricing is with the standard dining plan for adults. The standard dining plan includes 1 table service meal per day, 1 quick service meal per day, and 1 snack per day, along with that refillable mug. For adults, this is up 20%, from $78 in 2020, just before the pandemic, to $94 in 2024 per day when it returns. This is slightly above the 15% we were expecting. The kids' dining plan actually has decreased in price from $30 down to $29. The quick service plan, which includes 2 quick service meals per day and a snack and that mug for adults, has increased only nominally from $55 per day to $57 per day, roughly a 4% increase, which is less than we were expecting. Likewise, the kids' version of this plan has decreased from $26 per day to $23 per day. I should also point out that in terms of comparing these plans, the plans before the pandemic had 2 snacks per day. The plans after the pandemic, returning in 2024, only have 1 snack, but that's the only meaningful difference. For starters, in terms of a company arrangement, it's clear what this pricing level is intending to do. As we mentioned in the intro, Disney is aware that they've priced out middle-class families with younger kids. Typically, this means that the parents are in the first half of their careers, typically at a lower earning point than other Disney World visitors. If you're a family of 4, 2 adults with 2 kids, or even a family of 5 with 3 kids, these options are suddenly a good deal, particularly if your kids are closer to the ages of 7, 8, and 9, when they're likely to order and eat more. This pricing structure creates a way for Disney to market discounts specifically to families with young kids, ages 3 through 9. So expect a long line of web ads in the near future to highlight this benefit that Disney is intentionally bringing down the cost of a Disney World vacation for families. But along with this new pricing structure, there are also some exclusions and some changes to the list of restaurants included. The vast majority of Disney World restaurants on property are included on the list. There's some obvious exclusions, such as Victoria and Albert's, Monsieur Paul, Takumi Thai, and even California Grill, which used to be there before the pandemic. But there's some other restaurants left off the list of those eligible because demand remains high, such as Space 220. And there are others that are left off because I believe the food costs there remain too high to make the Disney dining plan a profitable venture for those restaurants, such as Chefs de France. But there's some overall shifting, with restaurants moving from one category to another in the list as well. The best character dining option for dinner by far is Storybook Dining at Artist Point. This will now cost 2 table service credits as opposed to just 1, which was its pricing level before the pandemic. The same is true for Akershus. And Geyser Point, which is a fabulous outdoor bar, once listed as a quick service option, has migrated over to a table service restaurant. On the quick service list, there's now only a few options that I believe provide unique and good meals beyond sandwiches, burgers, pizza, and salads. Among them, Flame Tree Barbecue, Katsura Grill, The Polite Pig, Regal Eagle, Satuli Canteen, Yorkshire County Fish Shop, and the Yak and Yeti counter service option, which is called the Local Foods Cafe. On this list, by far, the Polite Pig is the one that stands above the rest with recent recognition from the Michelin Guide. There's a lot more menu variety on the list of table service restaurants, but those table service restaurants are only included in the standard Disney dining plan, not the quick service plan. So the big question here is, overall, is this revised Disney dining plan a good value? And my answer is, it depends. Many people buy the dining plan as a way of managing costs. If you're on the dining plan, for the most part, you know what you're spending on food before you go on vacation. But beyond that, is the dining plan a way to save money? There are a number of ways that the dining plan makes sense for kids. If you're a single adult taking 4 kids for a stay at the Art of Animation family rooms, you should absolutely get the dining package. In fact, you should get the standard package. A single character meal for kids at Tusker House or Crystal Palace or Hollywood and Vine or even Ohana is $38, which is $8 more than the price for the dining plan for the entire day. But can the dining plan be a good value for adults? And before I jump in here, let me point out some new wording in the dining plan announcement, specifically that certain menu selections may require an additional payment beyond the meal credit. This was true before, such as with the prefixed menu at Monsieur Paul's and various enhancements at a range of restaurants. But that it's highlighted with new language suggests that add-ons may be a more prominent feature for the revised dining plan. In looking over the menus, I suspect that this will mostly come into play with 2-credit signature restaurants that offer seafood and fine cuts of beef. Previously, restaurant managers needed to lower food costs to get some meals to fit within the parameters of the dining plan. That is, they would buy slightly less expensive cuts of beef or reduce seafood offerings to fit the overall cost parameters for the dining plan reimbursement to that restaurant. For standard, non-signature table service restaurants, I think this will be far less of an issue, with the possible exception of some dishes focused on high-cost seafood. Again, just a guess. And none of these upcharges should be any issue for quick service offerings at all. The quick service dining plan overall for adults is more difficult to price out as cost-effective than the standard dining plan, but we will start there and look at some menu options that are financially advantageous to order. At the Polite Pig, let's say for lunch, you can get ribs for $26 and a $16 barrel-aged Manhattan, bringing your meal total up to $42. For dinner, at Docking Bay 7, let's say, you could get the stir-fry for $19 plus a $16 rum cocktail, bringing your dinner bill to $35. Add in 2 scoops of ice cream for $7 as your snack. This brings the daily total of food costs to $84 against the $57 dining plan price. This means that you pay $57 for the plan but receive $84 worth of food. But let me point out a couple of things up front. There are very few quick service restaurants where this type of cost savings are possible. Even if you're at one of those restaurants, you need to order the most expensive item on the menu, and then you also need to order a cocktail. If you don't regularly have wine, beer, or cocktail with each of your meals, lunch and dinner, it's difficult to arrange this plan as an overall cost savings. Also, this means that while you're in the Magic Kingdom, which only offers alcohol at table service restaurants, it's very difficult at that park to make the quick service plan valuable for adults. For adults, it's easier to make the standard dining plan at $94 per day a good deal. The standard dining plan is 1 quick service meal per day, 1 table service meal per day, and 1 snack. To price all this out, let's just estimate that an upper-end quick service meal with beer, wine, or a cocktail will end up being around $30. An upper-end snack will be around $7. This means that the table service credit needs to come in at $57 or more to make this financially advantageous. And there are a number of ways to achieve this. At either San Angel Inn or La Hacienda de San Angel at Epcot, you can order the carne asada for $54 plus the tres leches dessert for $11. Add in the most expensive cocktail on the menu, which at La Hacienda is the $24 old-fashioned, or at San Angel Inn, the top-shelf margarita at $23, and this will bring your meal total to either $88 or $93. Teppan Edo is another restaurant at Epcot where pricing works to your advantage. I have a feeling that the scallops might have a Disney plan surcharge, but the filet at $46 will surely be included. Add in an $18 mousse cake and a $15 cocktail, that's $79. Also a good deal on the dining plan. All of those one-credit character lunch and dinners are also a financially positive proposition. Chef Mickey is $62, add in a $16 cocktail, and you're at $78. Personally, I'd pick a different one-credit character experience than Chef Mickey's. There's also Tusker House, Crystal Palace, Hollywood and Vine, and Ohana, which are each $59 per meal. Add in that $16 cocktail, and you're up to $75. If you want a recommendation from this list, the best overall experience, I think, is Ohana, but Tusker House has the best food. And right behind them is Garden Grill at Epcot at $55 and Boma, which is a buffet without characters, at $54. Again, add in a cocktail and you're financially positive. But as with the previous dining plan, to make these options financially beneficial, you need to plan your meals carefully, make reservations in advance. Also, order beer, wine, or cocktail with lunch and dinner. If you don't drink alcohol, the current plans will offer little savings. Also, if you primarily use 2 table service credits to eat at signature restaurants, again, these plans will offer little, if any, savings. But the plans allow people to plan and therefore reduce the cost anxiety of a Disney vacation. And as discussed earlier, there are ways to use the plans to save money, but only if you work to maximize the plan's benefits. Regardless, the dining plan is tremendously popular. This past Wednesday, when Disney started taking reservations for 2024, that is, when they started taking reservations for when the dining plan would return, the reservation system crashed due to the number of people attempting to make reservations. I had their webpage running in the background for about 3 hours before I worked through the queue to the point where I could make one reservation. Let me also point out one more thing which I think is important. Now that the dining plan is back, Disney has one more tool to incentivize visitation during slow periods. I think there's a reasonably good chance that we'll see either discounts to the dining program or even free dining during slow periods in 2024. As the dining plan is newly returned at the start of 2024, I wouldn't expect to see any discounts like this in the early months. The free dining program historically is tied to low visitation periods in the fall. So from, say, around August 15th until September 30th, 2024, and for the 3 weeks following Thanksgiving 2024, I think there's a pretty good chance we might see some additional discounting with the dining program, even a return of free dining as a way of selling hotel and ticket packages. But for all that, we'll first need to wait until the initial interest in the program at full price has died down, which won't happen for a while. Next up is a story about Pixar. Pixar is a studio that I've loved for years, but presently there's a bit of a Pixar problem. Most of the studio's best-known characters date back to films that first premiered 15 or more years ago. The first appearance of the Toy Story characters was in 1995, Bug's Life in 1998, Monsters Incorporated 2001, Finding Nemo 2003, Incredibles 2004, Cars 2006, and WALL-E 2008. In the past few years, the studio's best films have been released directly to Disney+, which means that they didn't make the same level of cultural impact as did a film that had a lengthy run on big screens. I'd easily place Soul as the best Pixar film in the last 5 years. It's a family film that wants to explore big questions and does so effectively. What should we as people strive to get out of life? And what's a reasonable goal for a person to have while living? Probably not too far behind Soul, I'd place Luca and then Turning Red. But these were all released directly to Disney+, which for years then placed Pixar on the small screen. When theaters were widely open again, Pixar released Lightyear. I enjoyed the film, but also in terms of creative originality, I recognized that this was nowhere near Soul. The film cost roughly $200 million to make and another $100 million to market. It took in $226 million worldwide, which Disney divided with theater owners, leaving Disney with something close to a $100 million loss. Add into this another problem. Unlike Finding Nemo or Cars or Toy Story, that new version of Buzz Lightyear, due to underperforming at the box office, aside from a briefly seen walk-around version of the new Buzz in Disneyland and from a few toys with a short shelf life, left parks and resorts and Disney consumer products very little to play with in terms of meaningful IP, in terms of expanding out park experiences and creating new products that would sell year after year to kids. Last summer, the Disney company pinned its hopes on a Pixar return with Elemental. This will come out in mid-June, not long after this episode posts. The film is set in a world where elemental characters each live in their own suburb. The characters are made from fire, water, wind, and earth. Some of these elements, when they socialize, mix well, and some don't. Elemental is the story of Ember, a young woman from Firetown who falls in love with Wade, a young man made entirely of water. It's a romantic comedy about two people from different backgrounds who presumably shouldn't mix, but slowly come together, even though Ember's parents place a lot of pressure on her to find a romantic partner within her own fire community. The fire characters are hot-headed and prone to anger. The water characters over-emote and produce rivers of tears. The art for this film looks absolutely lovely. The premise sounds intriguing, especially with all of the characters being made up from earth, wind, fire, and water, and Disney clearly believed that this would be the film that would finally lift Pixar up out of pandemic-caused problems when their films were relegated to Disney+. Elemental was accepted as the fourth Pixar film ever to premiere at the Cannes Film Festival, following other high-concept Pixar films, including Soul, Inside Out, and Up. The film premiered on the festival's final night. The night began with an awards ceremony followed by a 15-minute break, and just before 10 p.m., Elemental was screened for the first time for a public audience. When it was finished, the international crowd gave it a 5-minute-long standing ovation as the director and the voice actors took the stage. But then the reviews started to trickle in. What initially felt like a strong premiere quickly transformed into some of the most mixed reviews for a Pixar film in the last decade. The reviews overall aren't bad, but they definitely overall aren't good either. As I write this on Rotten Tomatoes, it's at 58%. Even the good reviews, such as this one from The Times, places Elemental as a flawed but big-hearted tale of forbidden love. Add into this another issue. There's very little marketing for Elemental. I don't live in LA, but I drive through it a few times a month. Elemental is nowhere to be seen. Not on the sides of buildings, not in malls, not on billboards. The clips and trailers that I've seen, mostly online, are visually stunning, but in terms of story, they don't have a standout moment that makes the film irresistible. And even in the Disney parks themselves, the marketing right now is wholly focused on The Little Mermaid, not Elemental, though Elemental opens in just over a week. At Hollywood Studios in Florida in the Walt Disney Presents Theater, you can see costumes from the Little Mermaid movie as well as the first 20 minutes of that film as well. Later this summer, DCA in California will include an Elemental-themed pre-show before the World of Color presentation. I've heard that this will be somewhat like an adapted trailer that is simply shown on a mist screen, and little more than that. So I'm not sure that this is going to help in a large way in terms of the lead-up to the film. As I'm recording this also on Friday, I haven't seen it yet, but I'll probably drop by DCA on Sunday and see it then. I'm also having trouble reading the overall tea leaves here, that there's so little marketing for Elemental, unless of course the interpretation is the obvious one. Disney may be concerned about adding another $100 million in promotional cost to the film, as they did in 2022 with Lightyear, because they sense they might not get them back. As a result, some industry guides are projecting Elemental to take in only about $40 million domestically during its opening weekend, which would make that a small disaster. In comparison, The Little Mermaid just took in about $118 million during its opening weekend, and that is for a film with a runtime of 2 hours and 15 minutes, almost an hour longer than the 1 hour and 22-minute runtime of the animated original. And this means that The Little Mermaid had fewer screening times compared to most films. As a brand or as a studio, this creates problems for Pixar. Its most successful and best-known characters are from older pictures, as I've mentioned. Disney Animation Studios has also had some missteps recently, such as with Strange World, but it's also had some features with legs, particularly Encanto, Moana, and Frozen, all of which were released in the last decade. Lucasfilm, another Disney-owned studio that's had some missteps in recent years, has managed to keep its characters front and center before viewers with series like The Mandalorian and Obi-Wan on Disney+. And Marvel, despite some general superhero fatigue in popular culture, has put together many well-received projects on Disney+ and on the big screen. And this leaves Pixar looking for that post-pandemic comeback to create new stories and characters that will deeply connect with an audience and then spill over into products and parks for years. Pixar's next features will come out in 2024. They will include a sequel, Inside Out 2, and also a feature with an original story, Elio. Elio is the story of an 11-year-old boy who aliens make into the galactic ambassador for Earth. I'm including this story about Pixar here in our monthly news episode because this, I'm pretty sure, is going to be a story to watch. Pixar, which back in the early aughts was the storytelling powerhouse at Disney, is at the moment struggling to find its post-pandemic footing in the new landscape of Disney. It also has a different relationship now to audiences than other studios owned by Disney. Star Wars fans are mostly along for the ride through films and TV shows, through the good and bad ones. This is mostly true for Marvel as well. Each of these studios has an identity that broadly interests its audience across many projects, and presently, these types of cinematic universes fit well into the present conception for a Disney theme park and into the marketing strategy for consumer products. Though I believe that Pixar once had this type of fan base, an audience that would simply follow that studio from picture to picture, their audience, at least in recent years, tends to consider films individually to weigh if this current picture is one that they'd like to see. And in terms of Disney's larger vision, this is not how their most successful studios are moving right now. Pixar movies are roughly as expensive as other high-profile features released by Disney. Elemental, according to The Hollywood Reporter, cost $200 million to make. Guardians of the Galaxy cost just a little bit more, $250 million to make. And I suspect that moving forward, there may be a new set of expectations placed on Pixar, which will cause the studio in the near future to refine, if slightly, its overall vision. This past Tuesday, May 30th, the Disneyland version of Splash Mountain sent its final logs down Chickapin Hill. Even though it was nearly summer, it was a cloudy day with a little rain. Guests flocked to the park. Throughout the afternoon, the wait time was about 3 hours, which was insanely long for this attraction. But then in the evening, it grew to nearly 4 hours for those hoping to get in one last ride. Even Tony Baxter, the lead creative who oversaw the development of Splash Mountain nearly 4 decades ago, showed up to ride one last time. He also, rather humorously, brought a couple of small vials to take home samples of flume water. He was one of the last guests in the park, leaving close to midnight, and shortly after that, the ride closed for good. With the California version of the ride closed, the focus is now on the retheming of the attraction both in California and in Florida. Also, this past week, Disney flew a few journalists and bloggers into New Orleans to explain how The Princess and the Frog retheme of Splash Mountain would capture the culture and the history of the Crescent City. In part, this was an attempt to get out ahead of possible cultural issues for the ride when it reopens. Disney understands that this attraction might need a little extra PR work, especially in light of endless online petitions not to change the current ride. One of my first takeaways from the New Orleans presentation was this. Imagineering was looking to reframe this attraction as a discussion about authenticity rather than as an exploration or narrative extension of the movie. For example, The Journey of the Little Mermaid is a musical retelling of events in the movie. The same is mostly true for many other dark rides, from Peter Pan to Winnie the Pooh, and out on the West Coast, from Pinocchio to Snow White to Toad. The effort on Tiana's Bayou adventure is to create a new story and also to slightly remake the setting of the movie as well, to expand out the backstory of key characters and broaden the overall community that's being represented. And this seems a little overwhelming for a ride in which half the guests are focused on the flume drop at the end. That is, it's an awful lot to pack into a ride that is roughly 10 minutes long. For clarity, I was not at the PR event myself, but I've read transcripts and watched the recordings. There were a set of announcements about how this new ride would be laid out. Let's start with those. In terms of the ride's arrangement, the biggest announcement was this. There will be a number of new animatronics, all of which will be electronic, replacing the hydraulic figures presently in the attraction. Not only are these figures capable of a broader range of movement, they're also easier to fix if broken. The rethemed ride will include multiple AA figures of Tiana, as well as Louis and Mama Odie. New characters will include Prince Naveen's younger brother, who plays the drums, and a range of swamp animals who are part of a Zydeco band. The queue will also expand out the backstory of secondary characters from the film, such as the experience of Tiana's father returning from World War I as an African-American war vet, and the experience of Tiana's mother operating a small business that creates original dresses. The focus, however, of this PR event was to demonstrate that this attraction would be authentically tied to the people and culture of New Orleans. The songs in Princess and the Frog were written by Randy Newman, who is a native of Los Angeles. He's probably best known in the Disney community for his work on endless Pixar films, including those in the Toy Story, Cars, and Monsters Incorporated series. He very notably wrote and sang You've Got a Friend in Me, which has pretty much become a theme song for Pixar. For the attraction, Disney is looking to other musicians. New Orleans native P.J. Morton will arrange the film's songs for the ride and also add one original composition. Grammy winner Terrence Blanchard will write the music for the queue, which will include themes from the movie and also iconic melodies from New Orleans. During this PR event, Imagineers took reporters and bloggers to various museums and galleries to discuss their research. Items from the New Orleans Jazz Museum have become the inspiration for various props in the forthcoming attraction, including an old radio that will presumably present the sounds of the city and an early 20th century drum set that the new character, Prince Naveen's younger brother Ralphie, will play in a band. The group went on an airboat ride to the Bayou. They visited a research museum on the history of New Orleans. And lastly, they went to a restaurant that was an inspiration for that transformed sugar mill that became Tiana's Place, or later Tiana's Palace. At one point, Carmen Smith, a senior vice president at Imagineering, put this research element in sharp focus. "You hear this word again and again. Authenticity," she said. Tisa Powell, she was with us on stage at Essence last year, really helped us. She does deep dive research when it comes to both the complexity and diversity of hair, and she was our guiding force, giving us insight into hairstyles of this particular place and time. Research like this is always central to the creation of a visually interesting attraction or film, but at least in terms of the presentation, the research seems to be taking over other aspects of entertainment. My best recent reference point to this level of cultural backstory is the Jungle Cruise update from 2 years ago, when that damaged boat was added along with those charming chimps, and the old Lost Safari with the rhino keeping an expedition party up a tree was swapped out for a scene with new characters. And I do think that that Lost Safari scene should have been retired a long time ago. But in the lead up to the reopening of the Jungle Cruise, Imagineering walked out endless detailed backstories. The Jungle Cruise Navigation Company would be officially run by a new character, Alberta Falls. Among those in the new Lost Safari was Dr. Leonard Moss, a Canadian botanist, Rosa Dominguez, a landscape painter, and so on. And for a while after the attraction reopened, skippers slowed the boats down as they passed the Lost Safari and talked a little about the figures who were trapped up that tree by the rhino. But at least on the boats that I was on, none of the guests responded much. And over the course of a few months, the new Lost Safari simply became another quick scene on the shores of the jungle that the boats motored past. And I think the issue here is this. When Disney artist Mark Davis first imagined the Lost Safari, his primary vision was to create comedy in the ride. And again, yes, his vision in 1964 included colonial stereotypes that needed to be removed from the attraction, but the overall creative impulse in his design was to entertain by creating a scene with visual comedy. The reimagining of the Lost Safari, at least in its talking points, wasn't focused on entertainment or humor, but on other issues. And I think because of this, it quickly became a background element in the attraction and not something that was a focal point for guests. Beyond this, one of the most confusing aspects of the presentation in New Orleans about the redo of Splash Mountain was the revelation that the Imagineering team wasn't in deep continuous discussions with the team that is creating the animated miniseries on Disney Plus to continue Tiana's story. In ways, it would have been super easy to explain that many of these story additions were there to align the attraction with the forthcoming series. But at one point, Ted Roboletto, an executive director, seemed a little confused as to exactly what would or would not show up on Disney Plus. "Well, I don't want to speak for our partners at the Walt Disney Animation Studios," he said, "but it's been announced that Tiana's story is going to be furthered as part of a series or miniseries." And then a little later, Sharita Carter, an executive producer, came in to clean this up a little. Well, she started, I think what we can say is just like we've been working with Walt Disney Animation Studio on the attraction itself, we have had a number of sessions with the Disney Plus team, so I think it's very important to understand and have continuity along those lines. And I think that's all I can really say about that. In reading between the lines here, either there's not a lot of discussions between these two divisions, or simply the Disney Plus team doesn't yet have a fully fleshed out plan to produce a show that ideally should have been in place to synergize with the opening of this revamped attraction. And this second option may be supported by recent changes to the Disney Plus website. Initially, Disney announced that this long-form musical animated comedy series called Tiana, chronicling the further adventures of Tiana as the recently crowned Princess of Maldonia, would premiere in 2023. Then later that was officially pushed back to 2024. Now, the Disney Plus website simply says coming soon. It's also possible that the initial story treatment for the recently crowned Princess of Maldonia didn't exactly line up with the Imagineers' vision for Tiana in this attraction as the owner of a small business and the person overseeing a food co-op. For clarity, this last part was just speculation. But back to the main point. In terms of the longtime traditions of the Disney company, some of these recent PR junkets and their tone and focus are out of step with Walt's approach to publicity. And it's possible that times have simply changed, and this tonal shift is a calculated move, but let me point out some of those differences. Walt himself had many cultural and political issues that he championed in film and in the parks. Walt Disney passed away over a half-century ago, so his causes might be a little different than some that are championed today. But Walt was interested in preserving the natural environment in the U.S. He was interested in protecting animals. He promoted guide dogs for the blind. He believed that a sense of recent history was important to understand the current state of the world. He vigorously supported the Toys for Tots campaign many years. Most significantly, though, he believed that film and the parks were a way for an audience to explore and hopefully understand cultures from around the world. If you have friends who think that the Disney company's interest in cultural issues is something new, you should point them to a 17-film documentary series produced by Walt in the 1950s called People and Places, which explored the lives of indigenous Alaskans, the people of Samoa and Japan, as well as the culture of a Mediterranean island and Portugal. In terms of the parks in the summer of 1963, Walt Disney turned Center Street, which is on Main Street, into a cultural salute to Mexico, which included musicians, dancers, and artists. His idea was this. Once guests are comfortable, such as inside of a park, they are more willing to explore cultures that are new to them. And if you have friends who think that the Disney company's voice in politics is something new, you should point them to Victory Through Air Power, which we've recently talked about in our ongoing series about Herb Ryman. This is a feature-length animated argument for the government to change its military emphasis during World War II from traditional Army and Navy units and to include an independent Air Force, which didn't exist at the time, and specifically to rely upon long-range air power as the initial means to attack Axis powers. This film was produced by Walt and was an attempt during an active time of war to use the studio's voice and clout to radically change how the federal government allocated funding to the military and also to restructure engagement priorities as the U.S. continued its war in Germany and in the Pacific. But in these endeavors, Walt understood that the message though important to him, needed to be overshadowed by entertainment. That is, Walt believed that entertainment, such as the use of story or music, and particularly in the last 6 or 7 years of his life, the use of comedy, was the centerpiece draw of his films or his attractions. And once an audience was enchanted by a story or wrapped up in a sense of awe brought on by various wonders or giggling over comic scenarios, then he could move toward one of the political or cultural messages he wanted to discuss. But entertainment always took precedent over a secondary message. And that is where I think the current PR discussions about Tiana's Bayou adventure is slightly off focus. I'm personally looking forward to this ride when it opens late in 2024, or maybe more realistically sometime in 2025. I'm pretty sure that once this attraction is open, it will be charming with lovely music and all new electronic AA figures, and of course that big drop at the end of the ride. But so far, there's been a lot of effort to explain how this attraction will be an authentic presentation of New Orleans, but there's been little to tell us how this attraction will entertain guests in unique ways, or capture their sense of wonder, or draw them into an experience with a distinctive sense of charm, whimsy, and humor. That is, the message here is presently overshadowing the entertainment. To this, I think that a little of Walt's old charm would go a long ways, focusing on how this rethemed attraction is going to delight, scare, and otherwise entertain guests. Such messages, I think, would go a long ways towards building anticipation in fans. The Little Mermaid attraction at DCA or at the Magic Kingdom is a musical book report on the film, which is not a bad but also not a great strategy for a modern dark ride. But presently Tiana's Bayou adventure feels a little like a book report on the culture of New Orleans, even if that's not the focus of the attraction when it opens. What's missing here are PR lines that make guests eager to see the ride. Off the top of my head, maybe some statements like, okay, just wait until you see what we've done to the lift hill that brings you to that drop. Or maybe, the movement and dance of these new electronic figures is beyond anything we've put into Pirates or the Hall of Presidents. It's captivating. Or perhaps even this. There's a show stage where everything goes dark, and then you'll be surprised what you find there. I don't know if anything like this happens in the ride, but that generally is what Walt was really good at. Using announcements on his weekly TV show in such a way that he made people want to visit the park because in his voice was the whisper that something astonishing would happen there. And you sense that if this was how Walt was presenting the ride, then surely the desire to entertain was the central force that had been guiding his designers all along. And this, at least I think, is what the PR team needs right now. Something to show how this new ride is going to be even more entertaining than the one that recently left. So that brings us roughly halfway through the news for this month. We still need to explore some large changes in Florida, also some restaurant reopenings both at Disney World and Disneyland, and of course there's that ongoing saga of Reedy Creek. We'll update all of those stories next Sunday. And over on Bandcamp, we're still building out our audio guide to Disney World. Just yesterday, we posted our audio guide to staying and dining at Animal Kingdom Lodge, which is one of the most unique resort areas on property. Lastly, as you know, we're an ad-free, listener-supported podcast. We do just two things: deep dives on stories related to the history of the Disney studio and the parks, and news and analysis of current events as they relate to the Disney company. We are funded entirely by listener contributions. On Bandcamp, you'll find over 200 episodes not available on iTunes, but the best reason to join is to support the work we do here and to make sure that this podcast continues to exist. You can become a monthly Bandcamp subscriber at dhipodcast.bandcamp.com. All also leave a link down in the show notes. Until next Sunday, this is Todd James Pierce.